Good morning, everybody. I'm Phil Chetwynd. I'm the Global News Director of Agence France Presse, AFP. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what we are doing in the global battle against misinformation and disinformation. This was really the key moment for us, 2016. Misinformation is not new, but 2016 we started to see really the massive impact that misinformation could have on global events, on the Brexit referendum in the UK, and also on the election in the United States. And I think that led to very big soul-searching within the media industry, and certainly amongst us, about what we'd got wrong, why we hadn't seen this coming, what as a news organization we were not doing. Were we trapped in our own filter bubbles? Were we not going to the places we should be going? And what should we do to combat that? Within AFP, we launched a big consultation which we called Post-Trump Brexit. And among the solutions that we came out with after that were many, but one of the solutions was that we had to get much deeper into this world of misinformation and disinformation. And part of the reason is that trust in what we do, the mainstream media around the world, has never been so low. Every major media survey will tell you this. We are in a position at the moment where we have to justify everything that we are doing. Now, if you follow major news in France, you will know about the yellow vest crisis. And this illustrates exactly the problem that we have. These are Facebook groups run by members of the Gilets jaunes, and you will see they are getting more views and more interactions than major media. You'll see in November 15 to January 15, BFM TV, which is one of the major media in France, there it's getting 20 million. And these are Facebook groups set up by just one or two individuals that are getting massive amounts of interactions. It means they are just not following what we are doing. They are following their own reality of what they think is going on. And that's all kinds of false and misleading information they are sharing amongst themselves. Often very simple things like images taken out of context. This is a real image of a policeman saying, "I am with you, demonstrators," but in actual fact it's taken from a year before about a demonstration which has nothing to do with the Yellow Vest movement. This is conspiracy theories about why is it that, for example, all the license plates from cars during the rioting were taken off. Well, they're not. They're just doctored photos, and that's just a simple piece of misinformation that we were seeing during that thing. During the Philippine elections, another thing in 2016, a huge story where misinformation played an enormous role. We had journalists all over the Philippines covering this story. We thought there's no way that Duterte could win this election. But what we weren't watching was what was going on social media. Simple but very effective disinformation. Here, the Pope supports Duterte. He supports his war against drug traffickers. Of course, the Pope has never spoken about these. These are very simple images, massively pushed by groups close to Duterte, and probably had a very significant impact on the election, and therefore is really influencing the course of history of what we're seeing at the moment. And it carries on. The recent tension between India and Kashmir. These stakes are really high. You're talking about two nuclear-armed countries having a small military confrontation, and then around all that, an ocean of false and fabricated news, viewed often millions of times. This is a selection of the fact check of stories that we did just on this India-Pakistan tension. We did more than 30, 40 fact checks. Stories such as pictures with pictures of airfields full of planes ready to take off to bomb one country or the other, which are not from India or Pakistan. They're taken completely from another context, but are having a very significant impact on the discourse. And most recently, and this is an example where I can talk to you a little bit about the fact-checking we're doing in the Arabic language, the aftermath of what happened in New Zealand and the attack in New Zealand, immediately we're seeing images taken out of context to stir up hatred, to try to say, so this is supposedly an image of the bloodied Quran taken from inside one of the mosques after this attack in New Zealand. It's not true. This image has been online for some time, and a simple reverse Google image search will show you that this image has been online at least since last year. At least since last year. Now, online it says it comes from this story in Somalia. We can't verify that either. Perhaps that's false as well. We haven't been able to verify that. But one thing we can know for sure is that it doesn't come from the mosque attack in New Zealand. I'm going to go a bit quickly because over a few things, because my presentation is a bit shorter, longer than expected. This is how we used to cover false news. This is you may remember the death of Osama bin Laden. Within probably an hour of the death of bin Laden, false images showing the corpse of bin Laden were circulating very, very widely. They were used by many mainstream media, by many major news chains. Many newspapers published them the next day. What we did at AFP, I was the editor-in-chief in Hong Kong at the time, and we had a photo desk. We put the images through our photo desk, through the software that we had, and we realized very quickly they were false. So we didn't move the images. But we had no impact on the public discourse. We had no impact on whether those images were used or not because we didn't write about it. We didn't talk about it. So what it meant was that many media did use them because we weren't writing about it. So this is the change of context where we are now. Now we are moving to a new phase of journalism where we have all the journalism that we do every day by all our team around the world, the true, what goes on the wire, and so on. That's our culture, to report the truth, nothing but the truth. But next to this, we're having to do a new type of journalism. Some people call it fact-checking, but it's reporting on things that are false. It is difficult for us. It's a difficult conversation for us to have internally. All our journalists saying, this is not our job. We're here to write about things that are true. But when you're starting to see the things that are false having more impact than the things that are true, we have to take action and we have to find another way of looking at it. And so that's what I said. Sometimes the word fact-checking is a little bit misunderstood because all our journalists say, well, we fact-check every day. We fact-check things, and then when we take out the things that are false and we report the things that are true, that's true. So I suppose I would, again, use different phraseologies. But one of the things we're trying to do is play misinformation at its own game with big, vulgar titles. It's very viral misinformation. So you've got to hit back with big images that say very clearly, this is not true, this is false, otherwise it's not going to be seen. It's about facts, which are being quite unfashionable in some areas of the world at the moment, but this is about facts, unemotional facts. Write very clearly. Make sure all your sourcing is named and clear. You're not trying to write the world's most sexy story. You're trying to really present facts in all their glory of what the media really should be about. And we're trying to show and explain our craft. What is the craft of journalism? We have a massive problem with media literacy online. People have forgotten. They haven't been brought up with newspapers and radio and so on. So people have forgotten how you read information online. So one of the most important things is to explain and show what you're doing. Here's a piece of false information coming from Mexico. It's important to show where this photo was taken, that it's not in that content, to show how it was spread, and to go back and identify who actually took the information. And you know, many of these things can be done with very, very simple techniques. You know, There's a lot of talk at the moment about things like deep fakes and so on. Yes, that is a real concern, but the vast majority of misinformation that we encounter can be debunked with very, very simple techniques that really any journalist can learn or any reader can learn very, very simply. So we've taken two approaches to the misinformation battle. We're working with various consortiums on elections where we bring media together and we collaborate. This is what we did with Crosscheck in France, Comprova in Brazil, and this process is carrying on in different countries, Nigeria, India, Indonesia this year. And then there's our work that we're doing with Facebook. Everybody knows the challenges at the moment faced by Facebook, and so we are part of this fact-checking program, which is launched under the guise of the International Fact-Checking Network run by the Poynter Institute with Facebook. So we are Facebook's biggest global fact-checking partner. We're now working with them in more than 20 different places, 20 different markets. We built up this network around the world now, more than 40 journalists working full-time on misinformation. And we just launched in Arabic about a month ago with a team based out of Beirut who are working with all our bureaus around the Middle East to fact-check stories in Arabic. And how does it work? What it means is that effectively when you see, when we fact-check something that is false on Facebook, somebody sees it, there's an article that appears next to it that gives a reader the chance to look at something else about that story and go deeper and find out whether it's true or not. That's good, but that's not really enough. What is more interesting is to get into the Facebook network and to use Facebook's technology to actually amplify what we're saying. So when somebody tries to share a piece of false news that we fact-checked, they get a little pop-up that says, hang on, be careful before you share this because AFP has written something about it. Perhaps you should read this first. And then perhaps the more interesting thing is Facebook takes the fact-check that we have, and if it's false, it influences the algorithm of how that story is presented. Effectively, it makes that story less visible. And that is incredibly important because we can't do this on our own. Journalism, false information versus true information, false will always win. It's more viral, it's more exciting, whatever. We need the cooperation of the big technology companies to have that impact. Now, what are the big things that we're finding? There's a lot of jokes and satire, which is fine. The internet should be full of jokes and satire, no problem. But often people are mistaking it for news, translating it for news, and it's being misunderstood, and it's having an impact on news literacy. There's a lot of deliberate hoaxing. Each time there's a crash or something like that, this is the Lion Air crash in Indonesia. It was the same thing for the crash in Ethiopia recently. People deliberately put up false videos and say, this is what is happening. It enters the news cycle and it pollutes the environments in which we're working. Whoop. I'm trying to move on. I have a technical problem here. Sorry. Okay, you want, what do you want me to do? Just wait. Okay, okay. No presentation would be right without a technical problem, right? So. Well, I think, yeah, that's part of that. There are different ways that technology companies can help. One of the things that Google is doing which all the fact checkers are working with Google, is to make the fact checks much more visible. So that when people are trying to find out about a subject, the fact check becomes the thing that surfaces to the top of the algorithm so that people can find out these things. We need the cooperation and the help of the technology companies to really maximize the impact of what we're doing. With Facebook, that's in the algorithm. With YouTube and Google, it's to make sure that that content is pushed right to the top so that people can see it. I think I'm still, yeah. Because I think that's always one of the questions with fact checking often. They say, well, what can you do? If you simply write a story that is after the false story often gets huge play, viewed millions and millions and millions of times, and then the thing that's true gets viewed by a small quantity, and so therefore you're not really having the impact that you want. Here we go, okay, great. Okay, so hoax. There's a lot of just pure fake news. It was a sort of business where people will generate things that are just false, just so they can make money. There was a lot of talk about that during the US elections, for example. There's a huge industry of false health information, which is very viable. Donald Trump is an industry unto himself. I think he's on nearly 10, according to the Washington Post, he's on over 9,000 false or misleading statements so far. He's averaging 22 a day at the moment. But the interesting thing about that is having an effect on all political discourse around the world. So it's even the mainstream parties now we find are raising their discourse to a higher level because of the environment in which we're working. So it's not just Donald Trump, it's the total global political environment in which we're working. And everywhere we go, all around the world, immigration issues are at the heart of this sort of misinformation world. It's probably the thematic that we fact check the most, and you see it all over the world. You see it in Italy, it's about immigrants coming over the Mediterranean from Africa. In Venezuela and Brazil, it's about Venezuelans fleeing to Brazil. In the United States, about Mexicans. The narrative changes in every single market, but it's the same stories, and it's often images taken out of context. This is a good example here. The real image is of somebody destroying a statue in Algeria. It's nothing to do with religion, and you take the images out of context and it becomes a Muslim refugee damaging a statue of the Virgin Mary in Italy. Viewed millions and millions of times, shared tens of thousands of times, and it's false. So working with Facebook, we get, as media, we often get asked this question, hang on, why are you doing Facebook's work for them? This is their issue, this is their problem, they should be dealing with this. You're just part of a PR solution. These are questions we've asked ourselves, of course, but we've also come through with different responses to that. I think one of the things that's incredibly important is the audience is on social media. The audience is on Facebook. Facebook is arguably the biggest news platform in the world. So you can either stand outside of that, or you can go there where the audience is and try to engage a new audience. The other really interesting thing with Facebook is that because if somebody is rated as putting false news on Facebook by us, or fake news, they will receive a notification. If they repeatedly do it, they will be blocked from advertising. You will hit their business. Now, if you're doing that and you're making mistakes, you're going to be in real trouble because they will come after you very quickly. So it has a tremendous impact on what is the DNA of AFP, which is about accuracy. That's one of the great things about fact-checking. You cannot make mistakes. So, and really that's key for us winning back the trust of the media audience that has abandoned mainstream journalism, is winning back trust. Now, the main things that we've learned from this process, I would say, is that too many journalists in major media organizations around the world are completely out of touch. They have no idea of this huge alternative universe of misinformation. In every single bureau around the world where we've put a fact checker to look directly at misinformation in those environments, we've been surprised by the scale of the alternative media ecosystem, the false media ecosystem that we've found. And many mainstream journalists are simply not aware of this. Misinformation has no borders. This is an interesting fact check we did about the Croatian president, which was just before the World Cup. It's a story about how she'd cut her salary in half, sold the private jet, sold the fleet of cars, and so on. Completely untrue. But it was translated and viewed millions and millions of times. We found a version in Somalia. We found versions in Arabic. We found it in Farsi, often adapted for the local context. Completely untrue, but it moves across languages and barriers at an astonishing speed. The other reassuring thing we found is that real journalists still matter. There's a whole virtual world of debunking misinformation and so on, but real boots on the ground journalism matters. This is a fact check we did on the white helmets. There was a lot of misinformation about the white helmets' work in Syria. Notably coming from the Russian and from the Syrian regime side, saying, well, it's funny how the rescuers keep rescuing the same girl from different airstrikes. When in actual fact, these images were all taken by an AFP photographer. So we were able to go back, look in his metadata, and look at the whole series of pictures, and of course it wasn't true. This girl was saved on one day, on one incident, and she was passed from person to person to person in a human chain, and we were able to prove that and show that. So real journalism still matters. We need our journalism on the ground. As we've discussed, viral is stronger than real. It's more attractive. It has a huge impact. Therefore, we're not going to have an impact without the cooperation of the big technology companies. The question posed by our colleague in the audience there. We have to have the maximizing effect of Google, Facebook, and the other platforms. We can't do this on our own. And the reassuring thing for the last year and a half is for the first time in 10 years, the technology companies are talking to us. The media has really been almost run over and destroyed by the big technology companies in the last 10, 15 years as the digital advertising market has absolutely destroyed the traditional media business model. And in the last year or two, since the US elections, since this new context, they are reaching out to us in a way that they haven't done for 10 or 15 years. There is an understanding that there may be regulation. There's also an understanding that we have something to bring to the conversation. And that is something I found incredibly reassuring. When I have people from Facebook and Google coming around your newsroom and looking what you're doing, for me, that's a great development and something that's positive as we go forward. There is an enormous problem with WhatsApp and all the closed networks. As we fact check the information that's out there in the open networks like Facebook and so on, more and more information is disappearing into the closed networks, and we saw this during the Brazilian election, and there is clearly a major issue that we have to address there. And my conclusion, and I've got 3 seconds left, for news organizations around the world, this is just a top story. It's just something that we all have to face, we all have to deal with, and it's not something that you can farm out to your specialist teams. You need teams of fact checkers, you need verification experts, but you need your entire newsrooms to buy into what I would call a verification culture. Every single journalist in your organization needs to start understanding that they need to have basic techniques, they need to understand this misinformation ecosystem, and they need to have techniques to look at that and deal with that every day. Thank you very much, and sorry for the technical issues though.